So welcome to Team Development and Culture with Bridge Enterprise Centres. My name is Jayson Moore. I'll introduce myself properly in a minute. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Just in terms of the detail, don't worry too much about it. We'll be recording today and we will send this to people who have attended. And I think, as far as I know, there might be a copy of this going up in the Bridge Enterprise website as well. Because it's a webinar, though, we will be keeping people muted during the presentation. So if it's okay, what we'll do is we'll use the Q&A box in terms of engagement and interaction. So if you have any questions, I'd love to have them in there. I think we might try to give a few minutes at the end for Q&A. Or if you have a question that you're not comfortable asking in front of the group, I'm sure you can direct message Kieran or me, and what you'll be able to do, we'll try and address the question towards the end if you like. If I can ask a favor just before we begin, I just want to make sure everyone's got access to the Q&A box or the chat. Could you let me know in the Q&A box, how are you doing today? How's your week going? Are you all set up? Are you glad the heat wave seems to be over for a bit? Just let me know in the Q&A box, how are you doing today? So Hui, or I think it's Hui, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce that, said they're doing great. Mary is very good. Thanks, Mary. I'm pretty good today as well. Paul Newsom is all good as well. Thank you. Cheers, Paul. Thanks very much. Okay. So it looks like people have got access to that and everyone can see it. Fantastic. Neve is loving the weather. Loving a bit of grey, Neve. Isn't it funny? It's so funny. We begged for good weather in Ireland for so long, and then we get it for a little while, and everyone's delighted when the grey skies are back. And Mary Louise said she's good. Her walk is done and she's set up for the day. Excellent, Marie Louise. I just went out for a walk myself actually before this talk. Very important to get a bit of movement in first thing in the morning. Okay, thank you so much. I just needed to make sure that was working. So just in terms of getting started today, I want to start today with a question. And it's a question about teams, and I suppose how I ended up getting into thinking about teams and working on teams and team development and culture. So I have a question for you. If you could stick your answers into Q&A for me as well, I'd be very appreciative. And that question is, what would you do in this situation? So I was approached by a very senior team. This senior team was in a large organization, and this organization was going through an organizational restructure. And the reason it was going through an organizational restructure is they've been subsumed into a larger organization. And so this team that approached me, specifically the leader of the team, but the rest of the team were on board with this as well, is they approached me because they were formerly completely independent, but now they were answerable to the parent organization and to the senior management team and the chair of that organization. So they were answerable now for their results. They now had to report upstairs, and they really needed to maintain their performance in order to keep their autonomy, or that parent organization would start taking away their ability, I suppose, to make decisions for themselves. Also, as part of that organizational restructure, they now had to share resources and collaborate in a way they didn't have to do before. They would have formerly had very independent functions, independent budgets, etc., but now they had to share resources like finances and people, for example. Now, all this change, and I suppose this loss of autonomy to an extent, it was leading to quite a bit of tension. It was leading to a little bit of conflict and infighting and a lack of cooperation. And I suppose people weren't maybe sharing those resources exactly as one would hope. The other thing about this team is they all had very, very specialist skills. They were really, really good at what they did. They were really well known in their industry. They had knowledge and connections that would be pretty impossible to replace. And the other thing with them is, I would say, despite all the conflict and infighting, they were all very, very well intentioned. Once we got into the program, I could see that they all really, really wanted to do well individually. They wanted the organization to do well, and in particular, they wanted their own teams to do well and come out well in this. So what would you do? How would you get this team all pulling in the one direction and all coming together? Any ideas how you might get them working together? Any thoughts? I thought when I was answering this question, or when I was putting together this question, I was wondering because I was quite stuck initially as well in terms of how do you get these high performing people who are all pulling in separate directions? How do we get them on the one page? Well, in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about some of the techniques and that I use to bring teams together, and I'll refer back to this example a few times over the course of it, and how we got these guys all aligned and pulling into one direction and working together. Okay. No, we don't have anyone in the Q&A with any suggestions, and I was stumped initially as well. Okay, so it might be a good point to introduce myself. So my name is Jayson Moran. Technically, I am a coaching psychologist. So my background is in the psychology of performance development and well-being, and I'm really interested in things like stress, confidence, critical thinking, creating positive work relationships, how groups come together and how groups problem solve, and also team and organizational culture. I'm a member of the Psychological Society of Ireland. I'm also awaiting my chartership actually from the British Psychological Society, and I'm also a member of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. The picture there is actually of me and my wonderful partner Sonia, and that's actually at her graduation. So we both went back to college as mature students. So I went back at 30 to get to study psychology, and she's actually got a degree in biochemistry now, would you believe? So I suppose personal development and adult development are two areas that I'm very, very interested in as well. In terms of my company, my organization is Insight First. So again, the focus there is on organizational performance, development, and culture in particular. So we do a lot of leadership development coaching. I do team development and group facilitation, and we also do development programs. So they can be for professionals or leaders as well. You'll see on the screen some of the organizations whose professionals we've helped. And that's just giving you an idea of me and who I am. Um, so I'll jump back to the chat again very quickly. Marie Louise has been very good. She said that that team need to do an openness session about what we do today and what we bring to the table and expectations of what is expected to do. It's very good, Marie Louise. I will talk a little bit about how we kind of set expectations in teams, and I'll talk a little bit about what happened with that team as well. Thank you. Paul said to communicate, so open up discussions and ideas so everyone has input. Thank you, Paul. And yeah, and I suppose that is a big part. I'll start to talk a little bit about my process and how I work in a moment. And that is a lot of it. It's about creating those conditions and creating the environment so people can be a little bit more open and people can be a little bit more, I suppose, feel safe to speak their minds. And that's what a lot of this work is. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about my team, the process that I use with teams, and the development, the simple-ish developmental model that I use. I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of team purpose, and I'm also going to talk about the idea of team culture and how that can be useful in terms of getting people aligned. Okay, so just in terms of, I suppose, how I work with teams and how my coaching works. A lot of it really, exactly as Paul and Marie were talking about, it's about creating that space and that time to think and that space and that time to talk and discuss these kind of things. I suppose there's a support function to this, and that's around creating that right environment that teams can talk with each other. But also there's a challenge. I tend to challenge teams as well. So it's about challenging their thinking, challenging how they're approaching things, maybe challenge some of their behaviors in terms of is it helping or hindering the team in getting done what it needs to get done. A lot of it really is helping people to better understand themselves, better understand each other, and better understand some of the things that can get in the way when we work in teams or we work in groups. And a lot of that is done through creating awareness. So awareness of patterns, awareness of things that are going on. And often when we become more aware of what's going on in a situation, we tend to perceive it differently. We tend to get insight, and insight tends to lead to changes and changes in how we feel about situations, and also changes as a result in our behavior. And a change in behavior tends to lead to a change in your results. I'll bring in a lot of concepts and tools and techniques. They might be around motivation, they might be around communication, they might be around things like values and ideas, which I'll touch on in a while. But really, the power in a lot of this is about leveraging the group to work on the group. I suppose in terms of working with any team, all I can really do to one extent is provide the platform for people to explore these ideas. But it's always down to the team and the group to come together to do it. But in my experience, if you provide that platform, most teams will come together in a much better way than when they started. In terms of my team process, then, generally what we do is roughly six steps, give or take. The first step is a discovery stage, and that's usually in an initial conversation with the leader. That's to explore how they see it, and really just get an idea of what they feel is going on. So with that organization or with that team that I spoke about in the introduction, we actually had 2 or 3 meetings with the leader to try and get some insight in terms of where he felt the challenges and problems were. And then based on that, we'll start to put together an initial plan or a proposal. I use a method called the natural planning model. So we look at the purpose of the project, what it is that we're trying to achieve. We look at the principles, what's important about how it's done. Based on that, then we'll start to create a vision and start to brainstorm and put together some ideas. The next step then is an introductory session with the whole team. So this is where we meet the whole team and we answer any questions. And a very important part of this is about building trust. And rightly so, teams will often at this stage will have a certain amount of skepticism. And so what we need to do here is build buy-in. So a lot of this is giving information about how we work, information about what we're trying to achieve with the program. And I'll also talk about things like ethics. So for example, confidentiality and how information will be shared, whether that's on an individual level. If people, I suppose, are talking confidentially to me, how we handle that. And the other piece is often around, confidentiality around the work. Another piece then, once we kind of have met the team and the team are happy to go ahead with this, because I suppose the team has to be on board, we'll start doing we'll jump onto the research stage. So the research stage, we can do this in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's as simple as a survey where we're looking at, what do people feel the challenges are? What would people like out of the program? What kind of outcomes would people like? The nice thing with a survey is you can do it anonymously, so you can maybe get things out on the table that people aren't willing to say in person. And also a survey can be very useful in terms of measurement. I suppose we can measure things in that initial survey in terms of where the team are around some of those areas and goals. A second way of doing this, and this is what we did with this initial team I talked about, is we have a series of interviews with the team members, well, one interview each, and usually we'll use a questionnaire to structure that interview, and that allows us to go a little bit deeper and I suppose help people tease out exactly what it is that they want to get out of the problem, what exactly the challenges and problems are, or how they see it on an individual level. And a lot of that then is prepping them for the next stage, which is a planning session. We bring everyone together and we, as a group, we set goals for the project. What does the team now want in terms of an outcome at the end of this, and also what's important in terms of how we work together. Like how are we going to engage and behave, and then also down to the practicalities. For example, when are we going to do this? How long are we going to do it? How much time have we got? How will that need to happen? Do we need to do it in short, blocks of 1 or 2 days together, or is it better spread out over a group of time where we'll do it maybe half day at a time, once a month or something like that? Once we've hammered all that out, then we usually get into the main body of work. And so we'll work on things like purpose and culture, or maybe, how the team or group identifies and solves problems. And then towards the end, we'll always do a review piece. So the review piece is important. Often we'll have some form of measurement in terms of the success. Did we achieve what we were aiming to achieve with the team and with the group? We'll often have some reflection on what worked and what didn't, and also some reflection on where the team is now and what are its next steps. What does it need to focus on and work on? In terms of the team development model I use, I try to kind of very, very simple. I tend to focus on 2 main areas. One is team purpose, that's why the team exists, what's it there to achieve. And the second is more around culture. So if you think of team purpose as the why does the team exist? Culture is about the how. How does it go about achieving what it's supposed to achieve and set out to achieve? Culture for me is 2 things mainly. It's how does the team engage with each other? What's the internal dynamics? and also how does the team engage with external stakeholders usually. So customers will be a very good example of that. And so, as well as those habits of behavior, culture is also about the procedures and the rules. So, how do you have meetings? How do you communicate? How do you make decisions, for example? Then, once those kind of two major pieces are put together, it gives you a good platform then to kind of get things set up for for the future and what the team is going to aim to do. So, what are the goals? So, really, the idea is, once we know the why and the how, we can start to define the what. So, what specific achievements in terms of the team's purpose and why it exists and what it's trying to do, and also, can we set some goals around how the team is operating? What can it do better? How can it engage better? Okay, so I'll focus in on team purpose a little bit now. So one of the ways that I feel I really helped that team that I mentioned in the introduction was helping to explore their purpose, both as individuals and as a team. Um, so, suppose the reason that that works is when we find commonality, we find a common cause, we can be much more tolerant of perceived differences or different ways of looking at things when we've got one thing that we're all trying to achieve. Um, so if you want to think of your purpose really, it's your why. Why do you do what you do? Why, we all have a purpose in work, and that purpose can be personal. It can be things like supporting your family, but also, some other purposes I've come across is around, helping their own team do well, for example. Team purpose, however, is a bit more specific. So team purpose really is why the team exists, what's its function. And I tend to help teams identify their purpose by asking three simple questions. Question one is, who does the team serve? What are its stakeholders? Who has got a stake in what the team does? So those stakeholders can be external, so common ones are like customers, the public, that kind of thing. So I suppose these are stakeholders that are outside the organization, but also stakeholders can be internal. So they can be internal inside the organization. It can be other teams, for example, um, or other individuals like a chair or a board or something like that. But and other internal stakeholders can be the team itself and the team members itself. And I'll talk about that in a moment. The second question I ask is, well, what's the impact that you want to have for each of those stakeholders? What are the results? What are the outcomes that you're aiming to have for those people or those groups? What's the value that the team brings? What's the impact it's aiming to have? A question I really like in relation to this is, how do you make things better for those individual stakeholders or for who it is that you serve? The third question then is I get people to define how they do it. So we can keep this kind of simple without getting into too much detail, but how does it have the impact that it's aimed to have for those that it serves? What do you do? How do you achieve what you're aiming to achieve? So what does this look like? Well, this is an example from a team that I worked with recently. This is actually a veterinary clinic. And when we sat down and we asked the question, who do you serve? Uh, this is what they come up with. And this was 10 or 11 different stakeholders. I think it's an interesting one. And that was the first time I've done this exercise. And one of the stakeholders or one of the things that the team served wasn't human. It was actually pets. But they identified like things like the pets, the pet owners, the public. There was a big educational piece with what these guys did. They're based in the States. There was also the team itself. And the reason I've got that circled is that's often a key stakeholder or key group that the team serves, that the team can forget about. So that team that I worked with earlier, that team that I mentioned in the introduction, when we did this exercise, one of the things that they were missing was they weren't thinking about how the team served the actual team itself. How did the team serve the individual members of the team? And that's really, really important because if the team doesn't meet the needs of the team members, people are going to be unhappy. Eventually, people are going to leave. If a team is not serving its team members, then retention is going to be a huge problem, as well as things like collaboration and because it just really impacts how people feel they're not getting their needs met. You know, so that's an example of a stakeholder map where we map out all the different groups and individuals that a team serves, and that can be really handy in terms of alignment. So actually, who do we need to consider in terms of things like our planning. And then everyone can be kind of on the same page about what the team is trying to do. It's also very useful in terms of measurement as well, because you can kind of plan and see how you're serving these different groups. And measurement can be as simple as, when we start to define exactly what the team does, are we meeting that purpose on a scale of 1 to 10 for the different stakeholders? What is our performance like? Here's another example, kind of a little bit more filled out. This is from a hospitality group, and they had identified four key stakeholders. So they're like who they served was customers, their staff. So this was from a larger group. Um, so they had quite a big team underneath the senior team, the owners of the business and the senior management team, and as we were talking about and how important this is, the team themselves. I really like this example because I think they did a very good job in getting really, really clear on what they were trying to do. So, for example, for their customers, they said that we entertain, connect, and create a fun and a friendly environment. So that's who they serve, what they do, and the impact was so that they feel at home, which I think gave a really, really clear and good idea of what they were trying to achieve. So often the impact is, how do we want that group or that individual that we're serving, how do we want them to feel, which is an interesting piece. You'll also see on their team then as well, it's a very important aspect of this. They said that we support, motivate, build trust, and act with integrity. So that's how they engage with each other so that we enjoy our work, build experience, and have a good work-life balance. And again, you can see how kind of being very clear that that's what we're trying to achieve for the team can help with things like retention. Okay, so that's team purpose. It's about identifying who we serve, what we do, and the impact we're going to have. And again, you can see how that can start to tie into things like planning and measurement, etc. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is culture and team culture, and particularly culture in smaller businesses. So if I could ask in the chat, just curious, the word culture is thrown around a lot, and people talk a lot about culture and different types of culture and the best kind of culture. Could anyone let me know in the chat, what do you think culture actually is? If you were asked to define what the culture of a business is or the culture of a team, what is culture? Let me know in the chat what you think. Or in the Q&A even, sorry, as opposed to the chat. What do you think culture is? So we have one person put in the way things work in that particular place. I really like that definition. One of the classic definitions of culture is the way things are around here, which I think is very nice. Neve has said how we act towards each other and customers. Neve, you are pretty much on the button there. It's those behaviors that, in terms of how we engage internally and how we engage externally. I would say you can widen it from customers because depending on the team or organization, it's not just customers. Sometimes it's things like the public, or it's not always just customers, but yeah, that covers a lot. Mary said, does it mean how a group works and thinks collectively? And I think that's a very interesting idea, Mary, in that culture is a very collective thing. It's not an individual thing. You're dead right as well. And Paul has said the general sense of purpose and application in achieving this. I like that as well, Paul. I think culture and purpose are very linked. And kind of as I was saying earlier, I think if culture is your why the team exists, or sorry, if purpose is why the team exists, culture is very much how the team exists and how the team achieves that purpose. And Marie Louise has said the personality of the workplace and the behaviors and relationship that thrive. That's really, really nice, Marie Louise. So I won't talk about it today, but I actually did some research on culture and hospitality years ago. And what we did really is we were able to kind of create a personality profile for restaurants that really it was their culture. That's super. That's a great that's a really nice insight. Okay, so to talk about culture and explain, I suppose, what it is from a theoretical perspective, and this is from a lot of what I'll talk about today is from the work of a guy called Edgar Schein. I'm going to talk about a restaurant that I used to work in. This is one of the favorite places I ever worked. As a picture of it here, it was a little French restaurant in Dublin city centre. and it was great. However, it was when I first started, there were some very strange things going on. So let me know in the Q&A as well as I'm describing this. Would you eat here? Okay. So first off, the thing with this place, and it's just wouldn't happen now, but back then, and I started working there, gosh, it was nearly 20 years ago, was it didn't take any reservations. So the online thing wasn't a thing back then, but there was phone reservations would have been a big thing in restaurants, but this place didn't take any reservations at all. All it did is when it opened at 6 o'clock every evening, it started a wait list. So you could either come in and sit down and eat once it opened, or you could put your name on a list. So say if you wanted to eat at 8 o'clock, we would give you a call at 8 o'clock to tell you that the table was ready and in you would come, but you had to wait for the call. The other thing is the doors were locked in this place between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. and the phone wasn't answered between 4 and 6. So there was no way that you could get in contact with them to try and get your name on that list before 6 o'clock. So also what would happen is from about 5:30 every evening, you would have a queue of customers outside the door of the restaurant before service. So now I've seen that queue be up to 60, 70 people. Uh, so people would queue up waiting to get in before 6 o'clock. And then when you got in, it wasn't particularly fancy. I think it looked gorgeous in a lot of ways, but it wasn't fancy. So for example, the napkins were paper, they weren't linen. The cutlery wasn't crazy expensive. The wine glasses weren't particularly fancy. Uh, and then when you sat down in here, you didn't necessarily get served straight away. So you might have to wait a few minutes in order to order, whether that was drinks or whatever, because everyone was coming in at the one time, because everyone was queuing outside, and everyone would just file in and sit down, and you have to wait your turn. The other thing is, on top of all that, after you've waited outside and you've had to wait inside, if the kitchen got too busy, so sometimes all the orders would come in at once, the chef would insist on closing the kitchen for a few minutes. We're not going to process any more orders for a while. So you might have to wait for your food as well. On top of all this, the staff weren't particularly apologetic about any of this. Now, the one thing I will say about this restaurant is, as well as being in a beautiful room, is that it was the most fantastic, consistent, affordable French food I've ever eaten or had the pleasure to eat. It was great. Let me know in the chat. Would you eat here? Would you go through all that hassle for that delicious French food? Okay, possibly. Fair enough, Marie Louise. Marie, this was the busiest restaurant I've ever worked in, and I did a lot of different places in hospitality over the years, both here and in America. And this place was like, even during the recession of 2008, when other places were closing down left, right, and center, this place was jammed. Paul says, absolutely, curiosity would force me. And I'll come back to that curiosity piece in a minute, Paul. Yeah, there was just something about this place. So, what was going on here? So, I'm going to talk about I suppose a model of culture, and this is informed by this guy earlier I was talking about, Edgar Schein, and for him, culture existed on kind of three different levels. So, what he called the top level or the surface level of culture is what he called habits. And so habits are the part of culture that you can see. These are two things. These are the norms of behavior and the procedures and processes that exist. So the norms of behavior are just simply how people act generally. Like what are the habits? What do people do consistently? Um, and so in that example, the habits of behavior will be like the queue of people outside of the door, the staff not being particularly apologetic about all the hoops you had to jump through in order to eat there. The manager locking the door between 4 and 6. These are all examples of the norms of behavior, what normally happened in the restaurant. Procedures and process are a little bit different. These are kind of established or official ways of doing things. So these are, usually a series of actions that are performed in a particular manner. So, for example, the procedure with booking here was you queued up and you put your name on a list. The procedure, if the kitchen got too busy, is they stopped taking orders and they informed you were going to have to wait 20 minutes before they started cooking your food. Um, so we've got these habits, and this is the stuff that we normally see in culture. Now, in terms of what's driving these habits of behavior and these procedures and processes, Sean put forward is that one of the things that does that is values. And all values are really, it's the beliefs and attitude about what's important, or actually, more specifically, what we say is important. That's what a value is. And we have values around how we engage with each other. So, how people engage internally in the business, as someone really said in the chat earlier, but it's also how do we engage with customers? How do we engage with, what's our ethos in terms of how we work? And these tend to drive the habits. So in that restaurant, some of the values, some of the things that were said were very important was quality. And that's why they needed to shut the kitchen if it gets too busy. It was to preserve quality. Another one that was always put forward was that there was no pretensions. This place was not snobby. This place was not uppity at all. This is why the furniture and the tableware was expensive. It was as much to make people feel comfortable as anything else. Another value that was often talked about in that restaurant was fairness. And that's why everyone had to queue if they wanted a table, because the idea was that first come, first served. And so there was no skipping that queue, there was no getting your name on that list unless you were in that queue, and that was it. So fairness was always put forward as a value. And these values tend to shape the behaviors and the habits and the procedures and everything that goes there. However, values aren't the only thing that are going on. What we say is important is not the only thing that drives behavior, according to Edgar Schein. And he put forward that there was also these things, he called them basic assumptions. I'm just going to call them assumptions. And these are unconscious or sometimes just unspoken beliefs about what's important. These are unspoken beliefs about things like human nature. These are taken for granted truths. And again, these relate to how we engage internally and engage externally. And these are really underlying reason for many behaviors and procedures that aren't explained by the values. So I would argue in that restaurant, there was an unspoken belief at that time that the public can't be trusted. The public are going to let you down. And that's why reservations were seen as a bad thing, because sometimes people don't show up for them. The other thing that I would say was an unconscious assumption or an unspoken assumption was that sometimes making people wait is a good thing. And that's why the queue happened, and that's why making people wait to order would happen as well. So what happens is that, I suppose, well, actually, I'll get into a bit of detail about how these things happen and form next. Sorry. So where does all this come from? Like, where does these unconscious beliefs and all these habits and procedures, like, how does that actually happen? What's the process? Well, culture tends to come from three main areas or main reasons. First off, culture is always an adaptation to the environment. It's a way to solve a problem. So culture tends to form as a response to pressures from outside the team or outside the business. And that can be anything from the market to customer expectations. And what culture does is it allows teams to adapt. So, for example, the no reservation policy in that restaurant was because when it first opened, it was very, very small. It was 26 seats. And it became very, very, very in demand because it was really good, it got really good reviews. But what happened is people would book and they wouldn't show. But because it was so small, if you had a table of four, a table of six, not show for a sitting, that could be up to a quarter of the take. And so it just wasn't viable for people not to show. So what they found was if people came in person and put their name down, chances are they were just around the corner having a drink, for example. So they were much more likely to show. So the reservations happened because people didn't show up, or the list happened because some people didn't show up for reservations. And so it just made more sense just to have a list for people who were already in the city centre. And so they would be there. The doors were locked every day because of really persistent customers that couldn't accept that the restaurant didn't take reservations and would come in and would hassle the staff trying to get their name on the list before 6 o'clock. And so they had to lock the door because it was interrupting the setup at the restaurant. It was interrupting people having their staff food. The queue started because most people want to eat at the same time in Ireland. Most people want to eat at 8 o'clock. And so what would happen is people would come in to put their name on that list after 6, and all the tables at 8 would be gone. So people started to queue before 6 in order that they could get their name on that first. The other thing about that queue is it became the best form of marketing I've ever seen in my life. So people would pass by the restaurant, they would see a queue of 20, 30 people queuing up outside the place, whether it was raining, whether it was snowing, whether it was whatever. And they go, my God, that place must be amazing. And so it worked. And when we do things and they work, they become culture. That's really the idea. The second place that culture comes from is from the leaders in a business. So leaders can tend to shape these behaviors and these habits and these procedures and these processes by what they believe. They also do it by what they hire. Leaders create it through the behaviors that they model. We look to the boss to see, what are they doing? This is how we should act. It Leaders shape it through how they reward people. They shape it by the procedures they put in place, the rules, the processes, and if these all work, then it becomes culture. And that's where it's a bit of a group phenomenon. Because I suppose if the leader suggests things and they don't work, well, either the business dissolves or, sometimes a new leader is brought in. So in that restaurant, one of the key kind of leaders in it would have been the chef. And, he would have hired a sous chef who would have kept his standards. He would have been the one who was like, no, we're not taking any orders because we need to do what we're doing right. And he would have been the one that would have pushed the quality piece, for example. So your leaders are always going to be a big part, and your team leader are going to be a big part in the culture. The third way that culture is formed, and this is how it's made strong, is through the team members. So it's the members of a team create culture by socialization. This is the idea, as someone said in the chat, this is how we do things around here. And this is, I suppose, made by the team members, both explicitly and implicitly. And by explicitly, people will literally correct you and go, this is how you do things. So when I started in that restaurant, it wasn't the chef or it wasn't the managers who taught me how to be in the restaurant. It was the other team members going, no, no, you need to do it this way. And people will also do that implicitly as well. So we'll look, they'll fill you in or they'll steer you, but also you look and see what other people are doing in a business and you'll do what they do because that's how things are done. And this is kind of what makes culture strong. So in terms of creating a great culture in your team or in your business, what you got to remember is if your team's got a history, it's got a culture. There isn't kind of one size fits all culture either as well, but it's like it's got to be it's determined by what are you trying to achieve as a team, what's the environment you're operating in, what are the problems you're having to deal with, what are the people that are in the team, and how best are they going to work together. So there isn't kind of a magic formula for going, this is a great culture. There is definitely certain aspects of it, but it's going to be different strategies are going to work for different businesses at different times. And also this may need to change as things like your environment change or what you're trying to achieve change or the stage that your business is at. So think about that in terms of what's the culture you want to create. What's the culture you have now? And, it does that fit where you are as a business or what it is you're trying to achieve right now. Okay, I'm going to play a very short video by a guy called Simon Sinek on this. And again, it relates to hospitality as well as why I like it. Uh, Let me play this for you very quickly.
Tell you a true story. A few months ago, I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful hotel. And the reason it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can go and buy a fancy bed. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. If you walk past somebody at the Four Seasons and they say hello to you, you get the feeling that they actually wanted to say hello to you. It's not that somebody told them that you have to say hello to all the customers, say hello to all the guests, right? You actually feel that they care. Now, in their lobby, they have a coffee stand. And one afternoon, I went to buy a cup of coffee, and there was a barista by the name of Noah who was serving me. Noah was fantastic. He was friendly and fun, and he was engaging with me. And I had so much fun buying a cup of coffee, I actually think I gave 100% tip, right? He was wonderful. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah says, I love my job. And so I followed up. I said, what is it that the Four Seasons is doing that would make you say to me, I love my job? Without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, if there's anything that I need to do my job better. He said, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said something magical. He says, I also work at Caesar's Palace. And at Caesar's Palace, the managers are trying to make sure we're doing everything right. They catch us when we do things wrong. He says, when I go to work there, I like to keep my head under the radar and just get through the day so I can get my paycheck. He says, here at the Four Seasons, I feel I can be myself. Same person entirely different experience from the customer who will engage with Noah. So we in leadership are always criticizing the people. We're always saying, we got to get the right people on the bus. I've got to fill my team. I got to get the right people. But the reality is it's not the people, it's the leadership. If we create the right environment, we will get people like Noah at the Four Seasons. If we create the wrong environment, we will get people like Noah at Caesar's Palace.
I really like that video. I think it gets across the idea that these beliefs, these unconscious, these basic assumptions that were encouraged by the managers tend to lead to behavior which impacts both the staff experience and the experience of the customer. So these unconscious beliefs are people need to be supported versus people need to be monitored, and the very different outcomes in terms of the culture and the feel of the place. And that's the thing with culture. It's about how the place feels. And again, the same person in different environments acts very differently, and that's the power of culture. Okay, so Kieran, I'm going to stop at about 10 to for Q&A if that's okay. I just want to talk a little bit about some specific examples about how we build culture and get culture aligned in teams, and then we'll do some quick questions if people have.
That's perfect, Jason. No problem at all.
Thanks a million, Kieran. Cheers. So, as I said, culture, it's habits, it's values, it's these basic assumptions. It's a good starting point. Often I'll use this as kind of scaffolding in terms of exploring other things, is we'll explore the values side of things. So I'll often start with a team and we'll talk about personal values. What are the individual's values? And we'll do some exercises for them to help identify what's important for them. And so all your values are your beliefs or your attitudes or your rules about what's important for you, what's right or what's wrong about how we engage with each other, for example. Um, and always to remind people there's always a hierarchy. Some things are more important than others at various times. These are usually unconscious as well. I mean, we don't go walking around the place going, I really value this, I really value that. But what they are is they're very much linked to emotion. So we'll help people kind of connect with their emotions around what's working and what's not. And that can be a very good indicator of what's important to you. What we move on then to is team values, and these are much more specific and a little bit more practical. And these are about values around how we treat each other, how we interact with externals or customers, as someone said earlier in the chat is a good example of that. And also sometimes, what's about our attitude to work? How are we showing up in a day-to-day basis? And so we'll tease those out through a team. Let me show you some examples. This is a team I worked with a couple of years ago, and they identified kind of four key values. One is that we're all in it together, that they were loyal and trustworthy. Honesty and integrity was another key value. Commitment and putting in honest effort, and also respect. And so once we identified what those values were, then we start to identify what they mean. So in this instance, honesty and integrity meant we do what we say we will do. So it's about being reliability, and you can see how that would be very important in terms of things like trust. They said that they can rely on each other and that we highlight problems early so we can address them as a team. Now, I suppose, I suppose getting everyone, the group defining what these mean can get a lot of alignment. Well, what I would argue is it's not very measurable. And so often what we'll do next is we'll take the value and then we'll start to create what it means on a behavioral level. What does it actually mean in terms of those habits, in terms of what people are actually doing? Because that's something you can measure, because people either do a behavior or they don't. So what does that look like? Well, an exercise I'll often do to get us started in that is what we call the good ship exercise. And this is where we ask people to identify the behaviors in the team or generally, depending on the climate and what we're working at. But what are the kind of behaviors that help the ship move forward? What are the things that help the team achieve its purpose? And what are the kind of behaviors that tend to slow the ship down, that tend to stop the team from achieving its purpose? And again, so those behaviors will be around how we engage with each other and customers, for example, or how do we motivate each other? How do we connect with each other? What are we doing in meetings? How are we communicating? How are we building trust? How do we deal with disagreements and conflict, and whether that's internally or externally? I think a really good example of this is how do we deal with a disagreement with a customer or a client when we see things differently? This is an example from a different hospitality team, actually, where we identified kind of three core values: hard work and have your game face on, honesty and integrity, and trust and respect. And again, I won't go into too much detail here, But as you can see, honesty and integrity meant a very different thing than it meant for the previous team. This was more about transparency and being careful and responsible and accountable for our actions. Um, but then what we would have done with that hospitality team is we took each of those values, we would have identified, we would have done a deep dive into things like why is it important? So I suppose that's just getting people thinking about actually why is this something that we want to push as a team? But also what does it look like? And this is where we're getting down to the behavioral level, you know. So we're doing things like I think a really good example here is hard work and having your game face on. What this really looks like is being in position and ready to work on time with a smile on your face. And that's something people are either doing or they're not doing. And so we're starting to get into, measurable behaviors. Another thing that we worked on with that team is, how are these values communicated both internally and externally? And what might be some opportunities in terms of making sure this value is lived a little bit more. So, for example, this team came up with that, this will be something they would talk about in staff meetings. This will be something that they would keep in mind in terms of who they hire and who they keep on after a trial period. This will be something that they will bring into the interview process and, have questions around, seeing do people have, a good work ethic? Do they have the ability to put a game face on, when it's that pressure moment and we really want to perform? And also would be brought into performance reviews as well. That this would be one of the key performance indicators. So other kind of areas then that I'll often work on with teams are motivation, trust and psychological safety, and communication. I won't go into too much detail on these, but I'll bring in a psychological model, like say the SCARF model. So this is a model by a guy called David Rock, and this is a model about the 5 social needs we have in the workplace. And the thing is, when we get these needs met, we tend to feel positive emotion, we tend to feel motivated, but when these needs aren't met, it tends to demotivate other people. So SCARF is an acronym for status. People like to feel important. Certainty. People like to feel certain. They like to know what to expect and what it is they have to do. People like to feel a sense of autonomy. I suppose autonomy is about, do other people trust me to make decisions? Do other people trust me to do what needs to be done? People like to feel a sense of relatedness and connection, that work isn't just transactional, that you're there with other people who actually care about you. And people also like to feel a sense of fairness. So, for example, are decisions that are being made, are they transparent? Do we know why? And so, on a behavioral level, we might look at the kind of behaviors that make people feel important, like recognition, the kind of behaviors that make people feel safe and certain, the kind of behaviors that give a sense of autonomy or that show that you trust people, the kind of behaviors that will indicate kind of connection and what are people doing to connect, and the kind of behaviors that create a sense of fairness. Um, Trust and psychological safety. What kind of behaviors build trust? What are the kind of things that help build credibility? Can people trust what comes out of your mouth? Reliability. Are you following through and doing what you say you should do? What kind of behaviors create a sense of closeness? What kind of behaviors show that someone is just self-interest? And these are all things that will build or damage trust. Also, psychological safety is something we'll discuss. Do people feel free to speak their minds? How does the team respond to mistakes? Okay, I'll leave it at that. So just a quick rundown, really. We talked about team process and the team development model, but I suppose all the steps that I work with in order to create that environment for a team to come and work together, and also that simple development model where we look at a team purpose, we look at team culture, and then based on that, you can kind of start to set some achievement goals and development goals. We talked about team purpose. Who does your team serve? What's the impact it's aiming to have? And how do you have that impact? And team culture. How's the team engaging internally and externally in order to achieve that purpose? And that's the kind of work that I do with teams. Um, I just wanted to have a quick offer for people as well, if they like. I do run a 3-day team development and culture program for small to medium enterprises. We'll do a free initial consult. We do some assessment and measurement at the beginning. We work on things like purpose and culture and how your team solves problems and sets goals. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, you can scan the QR code on the screen, and I'd love to have a chat with you about it. And I might hand over to Kieran for the Q&A, if that's okay.
Fantastic, Jason. Thanks very much. That was a very informative session. Yeah, we have one question so far in the chat. It's how does a team leader tell where a team issue stems from?
That's a really good question. And I suppose one of the things that strikes me about that question is, should it always just be on the team leader to tell where a team issue stems from? One of the things that I really noticed in all my work with teams is one of the problems, let's say, is the team leader is the one that takes all the responsibility for the team functioning. But like team culture, how teams engage, it's a group phenomenon. And I think part of that is maybe handing some of the responsibility off to the rest of the team to help identify those issues and where they stem from. Because I think if you're a team leader, if you're going in and you're trying to diagnose, you might get it right, but you also might get it wrong. And I think if you put that out to the team, so there's lots of different ways to do that. Sometimes a questionnaire with as simple as, what do we feel the issues are in the team? And if you do that anonymously, then that lets people hopefully speak their minds. I think you have to build a little bit of trust in terms of the process first, and that's why I have got an info session at the beginning. And I think confidentiality with something like that is very, very important. Um, Other ways of doing it, there's a really good online diagnostic called the Pearl model, and that'll look at kind of six areas where teams can fall down, and you can ask people questions in relation to that as well. And then a certain amount of it sometimes when you start working with a team, you might understand some of the problems, and that can be a good starting point. But as you get into the work, other problems will surface as we go a little bit deeper as well. So my answer to that is, I don't think it should be just up to a team leader to tell where the team issues are. I think it should be the whole team, and you need to facilitate the process in order for a team to help identify those problems. And ideally, you want some form of a process there that is allows the team to identify problems going forward. And that's one of the things I hope to leave teams with. Hope that answers
Fantastic,
your
Jason.
question.
That's great, Jason. Thank you very much. And are there any books you'd recommend on team development and team culture that people could check out after this session?
There's two really. Coaching the Team at Work, the original edition of that by a guy called David Clutterbuck, is a nice introduction. It touches on some of the ideas that I talk about today, like team purpose and team culture, um, and I can give you a nice overview of it. The other one is Leadership and Culture by Edwin Shine. I'm pretty sure that's the title of it, but definitely the author Edwin Shine. If you Google leadership culture, Edwin Shine, that book should come up. And that's kind of the tome on how culture exists, and talks about his story in terms of his 20 or 30 years consulting and how he kind of figured out all he did about culture. I think he's got a couple of very interesting TED Talks and or definitely an interview in Google. I can probably share those with you a little bit later when we're sending on the resources. Like that
If you
look.
could, that'd be great. Yeah, we could send that out. Well, everyone will get an email after today's session with a link to the webinar just to recap on. And yeah, that'd be fantastic, Jason. Really appreciate that. No further questions at the moment, but I suppose if you're okay, we'll share your contact details after with people if they'd like to get in touch with you. To take up on your offer there, or maybe they might have some follow-up questions. So that'd be great. Might just go to the next slide then, Jason, if that's all right. Well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I won't keep people too long. This is just a list of our upcoming events for the remainder of Q3. So, look, our next event is our second Tuesday event, which we hosted at our centre in Nutgrove. It's what to expect in a WRC inspection. Really important for any business owner or manager to know what's involved there. And then we also have some a manual handling course coming up, which is €40 per person. That's at around a 50% discount there that we've secured for that. So it's very good value. And you can see all the other webinars there and other SME owner series that are coming up. So you can scan that QR code to book into those, or you can go to our website and book into those events via there as well. And yeah, just the next slide there now, Jason. That'd be great. And that's it, everyone. Thanks very much for joining today's webinar. And Jason, thank you very much for an informative session. The recording for this will be up online later. Everyone will get a direct email who attended today. And if there's any other bits of information, Jason, you'd like to share with anybody, we can include that in the communications out to people then. Is that okay?
Super. Thanks so much for having me.